I think just the general economic conditions of like the UK and kind of everywhere, it feels like are really fucked. That is going to affect the way in which people kind of interact with culture. One problem with this kind of wave of nostalgia and looking backwards that we're kind of in culturally is that we actually kind of don't take moments to celebrate like the good things and the moments of innovation. We're in this like golden era of like music software, and I don't think people necessarily recognize that enough.
Hello, welcome to the Resident Advisor Exchange. This is a new season for the autumn, so we've got only the best guests available. And to my right is someone that, if you followed RA for any number of time, you might recognize. His label has been a big part of our journey in the last 10 years. As a DJ, we've covered you many, many times. I think we gave you Mix the Year in 2018, 2019 as well. Omar McCutcheon, Batu, how are you doing?
Very good, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I am going to throw you a curveball right out the gate. 10 years of Timedance. What grade would you give yourself and the label at this point?
Well, I definitely think there's room for improvement. I think it's been a great 10 years, but I'm a strong believer that, we always have to be pushing ourselves and kind of reflect critically, I guess. So yeah, I'm going to say a B+. Pretty good, but like we can up the level for sure for the next 10.
The inception of the label is pretty well known in terms of like where you are club-wise, what you're listening to. You were locked into the orbit of a couple of other labels in the scene doing it. But getting to 10 is a big milestone. I'm really curious to know, because I don't think you've spoken about it before. Could you see over the horizon to number 10? Has there been any point maybe along the journey when you start to think, oh, we're going to start hitting like big numbers and big milestones? And if so, what did that look like in your mind? Like, what was the ambition? What was the long-term plan?
Yeah, well, I think there wasn't a lot of a long-term plan. I don't tend to have much of a plan of what I'm doing or where I'm going with projects I work on. I think I actually tend to be quite blind to kind of the implications of like what things might be when I start them, which I think is, is good in many ways. It's a blessing and a curse. But yeah, there really was no big plan. I think the idea of 10 years when you start a label just sounds kind of crazy. But yeah, as we've got closer, I definitely think a lot about how a lot of labels, when you go past maybe 10 years or something, there's maybe a bit of a sense of like the identity of and kind of the essence of like the genesis of the project becomes less relevant essentially, and you maybe need to think about how you're growing and reinterpreting what you've kind of initially achieved in those initial kind of landmarks. So I think as we've got closer, it's become this point of maybe the slight closing of a chapter in a sense, and the start of something like new. I think I really feel like I want to do 10 more years of this label for sure. And I think myself and Paul, the label manager, are thinking in this big kind of long-term sense. But I think, yeah, I want to move things forward again and kind of reinterpret what the label is in some regards for sure.
So the 10th anniversary compilation, are you seeing that as the full stop at the end of the last era, or is that the launch pad to what could be the next era, or somewhere in between?
It's a bit of both, to be honest. Yeah, I think we definitely wanted to work with some artists who were really instrumental to the start of the label, and who definitely are part of the future as well. But I think we definitely wanted to inject this new sense of what the label might become, working with some new producers and music from different places as well. I think the label has become increasingly kind of outward looking and kind of in touch with like forms of bass music and techno which are outside of kind of the Eurocentric kind of like bubble, which obviously Timedance was initially purely based in. It's purely a UK label to start with.
I mean, by the time this releases, it will either be just about to come out or just having come out. It's hard to know. But the track list has already been published. And it feels very much like a summation of not just the label, but like you say, the boats getting pushed out in this kind of like based sphere to different territories and different sounds. So you've obviously got Pearson Sound and you've got Yush and you've got Ski Mask, but then you also have Verraco and Bad Sister and you have music from China, which is something we'll get onto. I remember you talking about years ago as an ambition of like, I go out on tour, I go to Asia and I come back feeling really rejuvenated and like I'm getting exposed to so many things. So the comp definitely feels like a good way to like synergize all of that. But that could be a lineup in itself and it would be a very successful lineup for a lot of people, which I think shows how close Timedance and the overall sphere have been in lockstep these last 10 years. Which is a credit to keeping your finger on the pulse as well as defining your own identity, I reckon.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to me, I felt, I guess, that the UK and maybe just generally European kind of dance music there's always interesting pockets, but there's a general sense of like kind of nostalgia accelerating often, which has been happening. And I think we've seen that play out in different ways socially, probably politically as well. And I think there can feel, as a touring artist who's got to experience different places, you can sometimes feel in maybe somewhere like China or Taiwan or these places in different spheres, kind of musically, that they're not tied to so much history and so much nostalgia. And there's this space for like new perspectives, which feel somewhat fresher, I guess, you know. And that's become increasingly interesting to me. And I think when you look back at kind of UK dance music history, there was often this sense of like music coming from the US, which influenced the hardcore continuum or like, you know, kind of started it initially. And I think whilst, you know, we're in a different time now, I still think that there's this space for within, you know, a UK label to look outside and kind of take influence and just kind of marvel at like the innovation which is happening in other parts of the world and take that in our own little ways and kind of reinterpret it. And, you know, that feels like an interesting cultural step as opposed to maybe just referencing old music from the UK, and then we can kind of end up in this nostalgic, self-referential bubble.
Totally. Well, I think we actually kind of, I don't want to call it like a privilege, but I guess it is, to be growing up in a country that has like multiple overlapping micro scenes and sub scenes and movements that coalesce and bounce off each other. And you have basically now 3, maybe 4 generations of ravers could be in the same family. When you go to Taiwan or even you go to places like Colorado, like the States, they began on the grid in terms of their like first point of contact with underground dance music, maybe in 2011, maybe in 2017, maybe in 2021. And what they're producing is a reflection of, I think, that origin point. And often it will feel a lot more not unconnected to the past, because there is obviously musical heritage, but less nervous to be in the shadow of what was. And it means they can often push out much further, and you go there and just like, oh, this entire ecosystem operates under like a different set of laws than our own, and they're similar, and you can take it away and think, how could I apply this to my work? But sometimes they're simply more free, and the clubs are inherently a little bit more fun and a bit more chaotic as a result. And I think we're in a nice moment culturally of acknowledging that and seeing the value in that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, the kind of the potential of like imaginative, creative dance music is potentially endless. You know, like there's so many ways in which we can interpret these loose forms of kind of playing music, probably in a dark room with a loud sound system, which is based in kind of electronic sound. But you know, you can sometimes feel like there's no way that there can be anything new, you know, like we've all had these moments, I think, as if you've been involved in the scene for a long time and gone out and heard a lot, where it can feel like a complete kind of like vacuum of where there's like no kind of innovation left. And I do think that we have to look at ways to kind of challenge that, just personally for our own interest and our own, kind of enthusiasm, But something like, I think about this a lot with Amapiano, for instance, at the moment, which is a very kind of modern sound, a new kind of genre which appeared in dance music. And, these tracks go against a lot of what we think of as like the kind of tropes of like modern electronic music, which, often people talk about like the TikTok techno thing, for instance, like these really hard, fast tracks with no dynamics. And then you have this scene from South Africa with this music with loads and loads of dynamics. You have this like giant bass sounds with these kicks, which are really kind of low in the mix and quiet. And, it's 112, 113 BPM. Often the tracks are like 7 minutes long. And this goes against so many of the tropes of which we're told in kind of a Eurocentric way of thinking about dance music, like the tropes which are kind of defining the music at the moment. And people talk about that in like a derogatory way. And then it's like, well, look at what's happening in South Africa. We have this music which is almost like pop music. It's huge. It's a massive cultural kind of moment and like phenomenon. And it's not adhering to any of this. And again, I think it's not that we all need to start making Amapiano or like, thinking of it like that. But there is this really like unlimited potential. And I do think that, just looking further and looking beyond some of the normal channels will kind of show us this. So the potential for innovation is really limitless, like if you think about things in the right way, for me.
We'll get on to, the Amapiano thing is interesting because you did have like a 20-30 minute Amapiano stretch in the set that you played at Nowadays earlier this year. And it's interesting, particularly when you have these like enormously atmospheric tracks where a log drum comes in maybe at 4 minutes and it sounds like thunder and lightning crackling in the sky.
For sure, yeah.
It really like recalibrates your internal rhythm because you have to have patience for it. We'll get onto that in a minute, but I do want to ask you, does everything you're describing take the shine off the culture back home in any way? Because you're talking about it in a very optimistic way. Like, I could apply XYZ. I could go out and listen to only sound systems in Colombia for a week and then come back and it will make me feel good. But as someone who always thinks about the UK in its kind of like meta context and like where it is on the grid of progression, does that mean that when you play at home or when you set up En Masse or when you're doing things with UK-based artists, that there's like an itchiness inside of you of thinking like this isn't quite as progressive as it could be? Do you feel that it's trickier to make yourself excited about stuff at home when you have this kind of like global mindset?
It's a good point. I'm not sure. I mean, I think although, maybe what I'm saying could be interpreted as kind of making out like the UK's lost its edge, I do think that we have amazing crowds. We have an amazing infrastructure still for club music. I still feel completely indebted to the UK. So I wouldn't want to make it sound like I've lost my interest in that. But I think it's kind of just like adding more spice to the pot, almost, looking outside. And I think that, I think previous iterations of UK dance music have always relied on this influence and this kind of openness. And, I think in many ways, like sound system culture is, this idea of kind of bass and groove as like a kind of the skeletal form. And then you can kind of throw a million different things on top of that, and people are open to it. I think especially in the UK, we have a really great openness for kind of diverse sounds. So yeah, for me, I think this is all part of kind of the UK, the principles of UK dance music, which made it so kind of like vibrant in the first place to me. If like, jungle music was kind of less like multicultural, it wouldn't have sounded like as interesting. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of, I see this as like an extension of that same way of thinking.
Yeah, and trust me, I'm not trying to put like negative words in your mouth. I don't really think you're wired to think about things negatively at all. Let's talk about En Masse, which, I mean, you set it up in 2020, which is one of the worst years in history to launch anything, let alone an event. It's made it to 5 years now. I think I'd like to hear a little bit about how you go about programming, the logistics, your level of involvement, and also, obviously, it's not been a stable climate to run a festival. I think we'd like to hear about, as granular as you feel you want to go, the trials and tribulations of keeping that afloat, and also where it might go next.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think the main thing really at this point is that I increasingly like leave the festival with other people to run, and we have an amazing team who I trust a lot. So there's 3 directors, myself, Ollie, and Sam, all very skilled in different ways. The bookings I increasingly leave with Georgia, who DJs as Aisha, a very good Bristol DJ, an amazing programmer. And yeah, I kind of guide and kind of consult from afar, but try and give these people a lot of autonomy. And you know, I only have a third of the kind of stake in the whole project now. So it's changed a lot. I've taken a lot more of a back seat. For me personally, I think for me to feel as kind of fulfilled as I can, I need to be really creative as an artist, which means a lot of time in the studio. Getting too involved in kind of running a festival is you know, takes away from my artistry, which kind of left me not feeling as fulfilled. So it felt natural to take a step back in some regards, and there's other people who are really good at this around, you know. So yeah, I think a lot of my role was really giving the project a kind of impetus and a direction, and now it can hopefully like thrive without me being kind of so involved in the day-to-day. Yeah, 5 years is kind of flown by. I mean, every year I feel like we've grown, but also been faced new challenges. I think, you know, running a kind of independent festival without big money backing of some kind is increasingly difficult. We're really blessed. That Bristol is this, you know, great musical city with a really engaged audience who do really kind of follow us. But overall, I do feel like festivals like En Masse kind of working financially is really difficult, and I worry that kind of all small festivals could be absorbed by these bigger fish, essentially, who tend to, whilst maybe having like good ideas, they tend to fall into like formulaic patterns that, you know, that work for them financially. So yeah, we're doing okay, but it's not does not feel like a kind of an environment set up for us to thrive. Definitely not.
Are you kind of living, I mean, I know you're not hands on the wheel, so this is kind of the royal you, I guess. Would you say you're living edition to edition and like reacting to the climate? Are you able to like program ahead of time? I guess also, it's still about 800 capacity, right? Or is it maybe more now?
It's maybe a little bit more than that now, but yeah, not too much.
But are you feeling, you get through it, you debrief, and then you think, do we want to go again? Or does it feel like there is still enough road that you can dream as a team of 26, 27, 28?
I think you always want to think long term. I think we're programmed to think long term, but the reality is really that, you know, there's not so many guarantees. You know, I think unless you have this safety net of corporate money to some degree, everyone's in the same boat running a festival where you know one bad year could could really like damage things. You know, we get some money from Arts Council, which definitely helps, but the finances of running these festivals, you know, the more you do it and the more you look at it, you just realize like there's so many of these things are just propped up by external money, which is you know, it's a scary prospect. Ticket sales really do not kind of cut it anymore. And yeah, I think that's a larger, bigger economic problem that I have no ideas how to solve. But yeah, you know, it's tough. It's tough for sure. But we have a really engaged audience. You know, we have a really great kind of core nucleus of fans who come every year. A lot of them travel from other places and come to visit the festival. So I feel very lucky, and you know, we'll keep doing it for as long as we can, for sure. You know, no plans to stop.
Let's talk about the Timedance a little bit, because we should talk about Paul, who is obviously the other part of the DNA Helix, who runs it with you. Would love to know about some of the ways that you guys are A&Ring music, submissions, what's making the grade, and yeah, I guess the financing and the logistics of running an independent label in 2025 like you do.
Yeah. Well, I guess to start, I mean, I first met Paul in Bristol at a Timedance party, you know. He would come to the parties and we got chatting, and it was very clear straight away he's like incredibly switched on to music. And, you know, you can kind of tell when people really get your work and they really understand the kind of philosophies maybe underpinning what you're doing. So it felt very clear that we could work together well. At first, he was probably just more on an admin side, and that's becoming like more increasingly creative. And I think I'm more happy to leave bits of kind of A&R with him. In terms of the way we work with artists, a big thing for sure is that we try and work in this kind of artist development way. I think increasingly when you think about a record label, you know, essentially record labels do have less space in the industry than they did. I think they're less powerful than they used to be, but what we can do is really kind of help develop artists, give them confidence, help them with, you know, technical aspects of their production. For instance, you know, lots of the records end up at a point with the artist sat in my studio, like, you know, which is a pretty nice spot for listening to music. You know, if you're in a home studio, it's definitely a good upgrade. And you know, we try and help the artists kind of develop their craft, you know. So yeah, there's rarely a sense of people just sending demos and that being a release. I think often it's something where there's conversations for a year or a couple of years before we even maybe get onto the music, you know. And there's a sense of like getting to know the artist, to know kind of how they work. And I do think essentially that now labels do have to be a bit more holistic in this way, because just the transaction of releasing music is not really giving people enough, you know. They could put it on Bandcamp themselves, obviously. And yeah, I think and hope that this shows in the music, you know, that it feels aligned with the label. Hopefully they, you know, their stamp is still in their music, but, you know, the label kind of has these markers and kind of philosophical kind of tones underpinning the music, and we want people to you know, like represent that as well and feel part of that.
So there is one record that you guys put out earlier this summer that I did want to talk about really quickly, which is by Clara, who I think is a debutante on the label. I heard it in the Nowadays mix, and you were mixing it out of New Som MMM, which is obviously massive anthem. You've got to follow that up with something that stepped up, and it really caught my ear. For those of you who may not have heard it, it's 17 minutes long, super emotional, really like an odyssey for 8 minutes, and then it just like crumples and becomes something completely different. It's definitely one of the most audacious records that I've heard this year, and would love to know a little bit about how that came about and how they submitted to you. And
so Cow is just such an amazing producer. They've been around in Bristol for some time, but have always been a little bit difficult to get music out of, like finished tracks. But we got there after many years of trying, actually. And yeah, this track, I know at the time, I think they saw John T. Gast playing, and kind of got this idea of this, you know, kind of really dubby, smoked out kind of steppers music. And I mean, yeah, it's just one of those tracks, despite the runtime being kind of crazy long, and it's just such a powerful piece of music for me. It's, you know, it's kind of like this really deep, dark groove which goes into this kind of beautiful kind of sunrise kind of like moment. It's just, yeah, it's crazy. And it's the kind of thing, you know, I think, especially as you run a label for longer and the kind of the picture becomes more clear almost of what you're doing, and you know, you can feel less and less like you're going to surprise yourself, or you're going to feel like you're taking a real risk. And this track, it was obvious we had to release it. I mean, it's just it's such a clear winner. But yeah, you know, we've not released any tracks near that length before, so it definitely had this feeling of uncertainty to it. But I'm glad you mentioned it, because it's a really special one for me, for sure. It's also just great to play in a club and just just stick it on, and you can go for a walk or something, you know.
Yeah, it's very audacious. Let's talk really quickly about your DJing in 2025. I've mentioned this for our Nowadays mix twice, and I know that's not the be-all and end-all, but it felt like a good document of where your head's at, where you want to go. Time shifts, tempo shifts, moments when you zone in on amapiano, or you play like an old toasty record and then come up for air. We've spoken about this before, and you've spoken to Christian for Art of DJing a couple of years ago. You often set yourself all-nighters just to kind of see what happens, to keep yourself re-engaged and make sure that you don't become overly formulaic or like go into autopilot. Are you enjoying DJing as much as you have done? Are you setting yourself new challenges to make sure that like you're surprising yourself? And is the DJ circuit in 2025 as warm to you as it maybe was when you were starting out in 2014, 2015?
I'm really enjoying it, definitely. I think it's changed a lot for me. I mean, I prioritize production in the studio a lot more than I used to, but I think in a way that's given me this like sense more that DJing should just be fun, and I should take it like a little bit less seriously. I think sometimes there's a sense of people within the industry and DJs who are really focused on kind of getting bigger, that everything matters so much, and the way you play is, you know, there's this like feverish kind of energy sometimes in summer where everyone's trying to like push for, you know, like positions in this kind of hierarchy, and that can really obscure from actually kind of feeling creative and being engaged with your work as a DJ and the craft of DJing, you know. So I feel like I'm kind of less engaged in a way, whilst also being more engaged in the bit which I enjoy the most. I think you definitely have to pick your battles, because, you know, there's times previously where I think I was probably trying to kind of prove a point and do these kind of crazy, interesting freeform things at a time when no one really asked for that or wanted it, you know. But there's always new pockets of interesting things, and there's always loads of new music I'm excited by. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I think I played a lot of big kind of stages this summer, and definitely felt some of them felt really free, some of them didn't feel so free, but that's okay, you know. And yeah, there's definitely still moments where I can really like flex this kind of muscle of being quite adventurous when I want to be. And I think also that, you know, I have more gears than I used to, you know, slowing things down and kind of just playing a bit more rolling. There's obviously just as much as an art to that as there is to jumping around a million tempos, and I kind of just try and pick the right time to do both those things rather than kind of always being in this mode where I'm trying to like push some kind of boundaries, sometimes that's not needed, but yeah, it's the thing which is so amazing about DJing really is just you're constantly kind of faced with a new set of kind of problems or like variables which are always changing, and that never stops being interesting in a way. As long as you have new music you're engaged with, you're always kind of faced with this new set of circumstances which you have to figure out how can I get through this in a way which is fun for me, fun for the crowd, which is going to keep me kind of stimulated. So it's always different, it's always different.
I'm going to embarrass you slightly for the first time, maybe another one in a minute. Some of the tools that you've described and how you kind of unpick that lock include record box folders called Steppy, Student, Raw, Loose, Spacey Sunday, Vocal Silly, Space House, Sci-Fi Forward, and Batu meets Ibiza. Have you added any more to the pot since 2023 in that lane that will give you, an extra hammer to go and like bang down the door?
Is there new ones? I don't know if there's actually new playlists. There's definitely new. There's new things. I played last weekend. I played a sunrise set in Sicily, and there was a big Weepers playlist, which was definitely fun for the sunrise. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's these new things. Just my tastes kind of change. Amapiano is something we've spoke about already today, and I've been really inspired by that music recently. But there's this thing where it's quite slow paced and it's at this really slow tempo. So it's kind of like, well, how do I get here? Do you know what I mean? I know I want to end up here because this is music I'm really enjoying. I've got loads of great tracks to play, but if I just started a peak time set with some Amapiano out of nowhere, dropping the tempo like 20 BPM, so it's like, how can I try and get there? That becomes the question. So there's always these problems which are kind of, nice problems which are kind of based on my taste and where I'm at. And then it's like, how can I get to a place where I'm going to show this to people in a way where they're set up to like kind of interact with it positively.
You sound really at ease talking about this, which is a good thing, because when we did this 5 years ago, you were definitely mulling yourself and your position in all of this and the amount of attention that might be rooted through you as capital B Batu rather than a conduit for music. I think your natural resting state is someone who just like absorbs and synergizes ideas and influences and then brings them out as a fairly egoless jukebox. And at that time, I think because there were like a number of headline sets that were on the way, you were definitely sweating a little bit like the brandification of Batu. But what I'm hearing now is that doesn't seem to be as much of a concern in your mind, and maybe you and your audience are less worried about that. Fair to say? You don't have to hold that forever, by the way. It's cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I worry less about it. I think so much of this stuff is out of your control, essentially. You can't control all of this stuff. And ultimately, the things I can control are the real currency I have to live by, within this. There's plenty of things that I really enjoy and I feel really engaged in with my career. And like, I want to work to make them as good as I can. And ultimately, a lot of this other stuff is noise, and it can kind of be intoxicating. But I've seen how that can backfire on people, and actually, just I feel like more than ever, like I'm just dedicated to the craft of my work and making that as good as possible. And the other things, I try not to think about them too much, to be honest. That's my way of kind of dealing with this.
No, but it works. I mean, if there's like a word that I think is ringing through my head when I think about the music you put out as a producer, as a co-label boss, and as a DJ, it might be like conviction. And I think at that time, the lights were getting brighter, not necessarily through your own doing, but it just like the noise around you was increasing. And the fact that you kept that conviction and like maybe went into tunnel vision as like a form of self-preservation and didn't get sucked up in that rat race has paid off, because now you seem to be in an extremely comfortable place. While not necessarily like resting on your laurels, there doesn't seem to be the edginess of like, am I about to get strapped to a rocket and shot into the heart of the sun against my will? Well done, I guess. That's not really a question, but yeah, you get what I'm saying from.
Yeah, I think to me this has always felt in some ways simple, just because the people I look up to most, I think, are often just not people who kind of seemingly like worried about this. You know, a lot of my favorite artists, I feel like just kept at it, you know. Yeah, I'm kind of just drawn to these artists, whether, I don't know, like Ortega or Coyle or Miles Davis, people like that, and they just kind of like kept doubling down on like what they were interested in, you know. And I just love that. I just think that that's so kind of inspiring, and so much cool stuff comes from that. And you know, I kind of try and kind of judge myself against people that work in that way that I find like very inspiring, and hold myself to a high standard for that, you know. And ultimately that just is all about the craft and the kind of dedication to the work, which, you know, can be it can be hard to kind of keep that sense within like an industry where there's a lot of spectacle, you know. There's a lot of spectacle, but it is just spectacle, like, I think. And yeah, for me, the way I want to communicate ideas and creativity is really through kind of music and art, and I find that more comfortable than anything else. So I'm kind of just trying to keep in that lane, you know, a lot of the time.
Something that definitely seems like a deliberate move in the way that you like map out a year, or where you go, where like you curate, is it feels like you're very warm to these kind of incubators, if you want to call it that, of that doubling down. So you have obviously Timedance, get to curate a Drummerland. I think you'll go back to Open Ground 6-10 times a year, and obviously someone like Anestus is another person who's in that, like, they're just laser focused and they double down and they are not letting noise creep in, to their massive benefit, because they produce amazing work even to this day. Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit about the relationship you have with those kind of spaces, some festivals, cultural centres, or other labels that really like allow for depressurized artistry in that way.
Yeah, good question. I think to a certain level, like often these people or projects that kind of align with Timedance's values or En Masse's values, or like my kind of personal values, they just, there's like a certain kind of like magnetic force, and you kind of just end up in each other's orbits eventually. I feel like, yeah, I have a big affinity to Open Ground, and I feel very like connected to what they're doing. I've not been many times yet, you know, but like it's already feels like a very strong connection. And, you know, I'd never met like Mark and Eustace before. I'd never met the crew that do the bookings for Open Ground, but it just feels very natural. And, you know, I'm in a very privileged position where I get to meet these people, and we get to chat, and, you know, kind of good stuff comes from that. Same with Dry Molen, you know. I think Milo, who runs the festival, just his philosophy and the way he thinks about music just aligns with Timedance so well. As soon as myself and Paul started talking with him, that we all just kind of got on really well. I think a lot of the kind of ways in which he thinks about booking the festival, the ways we think about running the label. So these things usually feel quite natural. I think I'm just in a very lucky position to kind of have access to other people like this.
You mentioned Timedance has values as a label. Could you put words to what those values are?
I don't have kind of an elevator pitch, but I think it all comes from these philosophies that dub music really instilled. And then I think there's definitely like a lot of kind of Afrofuturism within that as well. And I think for me, a lot of those ideas have become kind of retro forms, like nostalgic forms. But to me, they can be applied to kind of contemporary tools and contemporary principles just as much. So, I think often people would say that the music on Timedance has this kind of sound design quality. To me, if you think about the way like Lee Perry was making music, or King Tubby, or someone, they were using tools they had at their disposal, to kind of make this futuristic kind of mad scientist kind of aesthetic. I think a lot of what we're doing is similar to that, just in a form where we're using a lot of digital tools and new VSTs. We're in this like golden era of like music software, and I don't think people necessarily recognize that enough. Like, we have just incredible tools at our disposal, which are relatively affordable, just full of mad new ways to make sound, which has kind of never been heard before. So to me, it makes so much sense to utilize that in like new forms of kind of like music in dead to dub culture. So I think a lot about those kind of things, and I guess we've already spoke about it a bit, but this idea of UK dance music and kind of the hardcore continuum being like a vessel for like new forms of innovation. And yeah, I don't think that's like a kind of nostalgic or self-referential thing. It's like new forms. I think there was this sense, probably from what I can tell, of like kind of I don't know, kind of critical analysis almost of like what had come before, and like people kind of jostling and finding new ways to interpret stuff. And that I love that idea. I love that idea, and that feels very much something with Timedance we're trying to like kind of play with. Trying to play with the forms of how we can kind of engage people but offer like a new kind of perspective on sound at the same time.
I promise you this question is not trying to make us feel like a million years old, but is everything you just said something that you can get across to young artists or people who are beginning to engage with a label? Is that philosophy something that you can package and distill in words of wisdom to a 21-year-old? Or do you think that kind of appreciation of the kind of like larger meta themes of what like sound system music can be and what it can convey, does that naturally come with time in the field and experience?
I would say the main thing is hearing music in the right space on a really good sound system. I think so much heavy lifting can be done of these kind of ideas. I think you can distill all of that into hearing music on a great sound system. I think a lot about going to hear like Abashanti play, for instance, and some of that music can end up sounding really trippy, and there's these weird sounds on top. You just have this like obviously massive bass and this kind of very kind of spiritual kind of experience with the sound system. And you could write paragraphs about what that means or like what that's doing, but it's all there. You feel it in your rib cage. You feel it. There's an emotional reaction. And yeah, I think we talk a lot in the industry about ways of engaging young people, and whether education, the space for education, or how much of what that means or how that plays out. But I think so much of it is just making the right conditions for artists and for the audience to kind of engage. You make the right conditions for engagement, and I think I like to believe or be optimistic that is kind of enough.
We probably don't have enough time to get into this in depth, but given everything you said and the psychological, intellectual, spiritual benefit of going out and getting your DNA rearranged in front of a sound system, it is obviously a tragedy that kind of thing now costs 3-4 times more than it did maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Average price for a ticket of simply going out and experiencing new things is prohibitive, so people don't. This is not placing the burden of anything on your shoulders, but I do wonder if the fact that a lot of the way you work is very community oriented is to some degree way to softly push back on that the walls of like pricing people out are going up, the walls of like siloing people and ways of thinking and experiencing are going up. And I guess to some degree a through line of your work might be trying to take those walls down and give people the same entry and the same experience that I guess you had 15 years ago and people before us had 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
I mean, yeah, I think a massive thing to think about if we're talking about young people kind of engaging with art generally, not even dance music culture, is kind of ticket pricing. And I think there was definitely this idea when I moved to Bristol, of just people going out constantly because they were so enthusiastic about the culture and just absorbing everything like a sponge. And I think that kind of can give you a vitality which you carry for many years to come, and that's obviously not possible anymore. I mean, I think we can talk about this in a vacuum of club music, but I think just the general economic conditions of like the UK and kind of everywhere, it feels like are really fucked. In short,
to say the least.
And that is going to affect the way in which people kind of interact with culture. And I think the UK is massively complacent that, on a kind of a government level, that just this stuff is going to be here forever, that, we already have Oasis and the Beatles or whatever. So like, why do we need to invest in culture? And, I think in Europe, you definitely see a lot more things which have funding from, the EU or from the state, which help make interesting things happen. And, we're really like sorely lacking that. That's only one part of kind of the problem or a solution. But I do think that this complacency that the UK is just kind of going to have this like cultural stock and this like kind of like power is very arrogant. And I wish we saw more kind of help from the government, because that's one thing which could make a difference. And there's just seems no interest in supporting any of this stuff as far as I can see.
Arrogant is a pretty good way to put it. I think there becomes a moment where contemporary culture becomes, if not institutionalized, then it becomes part of something you can celebrate at 20, 25 years. You can start doing orchestral rendition to drum-based songs. You can start putting people on the proms, and people in a higher position will understand its cultural value. But what are you doing week by week to actually materially support the development of the new iterations of that? And I think that disconnect has become really stark, and I'm not feeling great about it getting better anytime soon, given the way we're tracking. It's a little bit like climate change, that you might only really recognize the severity of the problem when it's up against your nose. But yeah, it's completely true. People might be sitting here in 25 years and be like, there was a gulf and there was like scarcity of new things because none of us could afford to go out or create or be creative, and culture just kind of withered on the vine. Sounds very pessimistic when I say it out loud, and I obviously hope that doesn't happen. But yeah, talking about it and doing something about it are vastly different things, particularly at like a government level. And I think, like you said, there's a huge lack of awareness and lack of momentum to like fix that. Depressing.
Well, one thing I would say about this though is that I think sometimes we get so bogged down, partly in nostalgia, but also like the problems that, yeah, we don't kind of celebrate the amazing kind of like successes of like underground culture as well. Like I think, you know, in the last few years we've had like, you know, Juro artists getting to #1. We've had this explosion of like, you know, kind of Afro beats across the world, of Amapiano, for instance. There's some really beautiful pockets of things happening. And I think one problem with this kind of wave of nostalgia and kind of looking backwards that we're kind of in culturally is that we actually kind of don't take moments to celebrate like the good things and the moments of innovation. And I think to a certain level, like, you know, optimism is like a kind of political choice. And, you know, there's been some really great kind of bits of like examples of creativity to celebrate. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom for sure. There's a lot to be pessimistic about, but I think there's some really great musical like things happening throughout the world. And I take solace in celebrating them for sure.
Very optimistic way to look at things, but I guess that's the best reprieve if you actually go out, like we talked about at the very start. You go out, you dig for culture, you engage with it, you talk to people on the ground, you put yourself in positions slightly outside your comfort zone and just get reanimated and re-energized, and then you bring that spirit back with you. In many ways, a lot of the time, that's the best thing you can do, both for yourself, for the music you make and produce and sire, but also for the people around you who look up to you. And I think it's a very optimistic and honourable way to be as an artist. We are running out of time, unfortunately, so I will switch to two semi-final questions. Spoke a bit about Afrobeats and Amapiano. Would love to know names, labels, genres, locations that are really like truly doing it for you right now in 2025. Like, what is truly giving you a jolt of the future, excitement, or simply stuff that you've just been rinsing and finding really enjoyable as you keep playing over and over?
Great question. I think there's this wave of I think people are calling it UK AMA, the kind of stuff that like Scratch Clark is doing, and then a few producers like Scotty D and Mr. Taffer for sure. And these are guys who have been kind of in the UK funky and Afro house kind of scene, and then have been getting a lot of influence from Amapiano and kind of making their own like kind of very London sounding kind of take of that. It's pretty kind of dark and a lot of bass. It feels very indebted to kind of the previous forms of like kind of London dance music, but with this new tempo and this kind of newer like kind of sonic identity to it. And yeah, I think that's really exciting. I think it's really cool, and it's also like a scene which is based around a lot of like black producers, you know, like from London, which definitely feels like we have less you know, people of color making music right now. So that is a pocket I'm really excited about. I think it's really cool and definitely a fresh kind of hybrid of like kind of London club music. Beyond that, I mean, I don't know like very much about it really, so I don't want to speak in detail, but just Brazil is just a crazy hub of electronic music right now. I'm always really inspired by the Mexican scene as well. I think there's a lot of really great music coming out of Mexico City. And yeah, where else? Bristol's really good too. To bring it closer to home. Yeah, there's some DJs who are a bit less established coming from Bristol. Aisha and K-Means for sure, who are really doing some kind of different stuff and interpreting kind of parts of Bristol kind of music heritage, I guess, in a really different way. So yeah, those are all things for sure which are exciting me at the moment.
On the Brazilian side, the Bad Sister song on the Timedance 10 compilation is wicked. That and Zoomies for Piercing Sound were the ones that I was just like, had to play it twice in a row. Yeah, we could talk for another hour about what's coming out of Brazil at the moment. I feel humbled every time I look at it because I just don't get how far advanced so much of it is and so how unpermutable it is. But it's the kind of thing that you want to go down the wormhole just to try and grasp onto anything solid. Yeah, they're really doing it in an insane way and at an insane level.
Agreed.
You'll have to forgive me for a final question, which is inherently nostalgic, but you don't have to make it nostalgic if you don't want to. You mentioned playing at Sunrise earlier. It's the last DJ set you ever play. The sun has come up. You've got to close. What would be your last song in that environment, do you think?
Oh my God. The $1 million question.
Sorry.
Wow. I'm going to pick a song which I heard recently. I have to give a big shout to Liv Wu-Tang for playing this and then giving me the ID. I did play it at the Sunrise set in Sicily, but it's a really perfect one. It's by D-Tron featuring Steve Spacek, and it's called Choose Me. It's kind of got everything I want in like a Sunrise track for sure. It's like really beautiful, kind of romantic vocal, along with like a big it's kind of like a broken beat track, I guess. It's got this really big bass line and these kind of soaring synths. It works very well for that moment, for sure. And it kind of makes me want to cry every time I hear it, which is part of the Sunrise thing, for sure. You want some tears.
Congratulations, 10 years, Timedance. Batu, thank you very much. And I guess I'll see you here in another 5 years, given that we're having that pattern going on. Nice one, mate. Thank you very much.
Nice one. Thank you.